It's like we're not going anywhere. Maybe it's because there's something in the air. And I don't even care, no, to the beat, yo. It's like we're not going anywhere. Maybe it's because there's something in the air. And I don't even care, no.
I'm in a good mood this morning, so I had to put on a little like neo soul funk. It was that kind of a day. Welcome. Hi, welcome to Resistance Live. It is the 28th of March, 2024, and I'm ECM. We got tons of stuff to talk about today, you guys. My list is detailed and very long. We're going to start with John Eastman's disbarment because there are some bigger implications for this than what might otherwise be apparent just from the breaking news. For our visually challenged viewers today, I'm wearing a black turtleneck. I am a dirty blonde, pink-skinned, green-eyed woman, and I am sitting in front of my plant and my lamp and my chair. Shout out to all of our visually challenged viewers. I've had like a bunch of complaints since we added new viewers about the fact that I do this every morning, but I gotta say we have legally blind viewers in this audience who have been with me since the very beginning, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure people feel like they're included, right? I'm coming to you as always from occupied Tongva territory here in Southern California. All right, let's go. So yesterday, John Eastman, formerly an attorney for Mr. Donald J. Trump, was disbarred in the state of California after a hearing. Now, this did not come as any big surprise because John Eastman did such a huge swath of unethical conduct in relation to the 2020 election that pretty much everyone expected that he would be disbarred. However, there is a finding by the judge in this hearing that took place yesterday that has much larger implications than what you might ordinarily think. So here's the skinny. The judge found that John Eastman had conspired with Donald Trump to overthrow the 2020 election. Now, those of you who have been here for a very long time will remember that we've had a lot of discussions here on the broadcast about the issue of the attorney-client privilege and something called the crime fraud exception. All right. The crime fraud exception essentially says that if you as an attorney are engaged in a crime with your client, attorney-client privilege doesn't apply. But it gets a little bit better. We've had a lot of debate in the Trump criminal prosecutions about whether or not he's going to rely on what's called an advice of counsel defense, okay? In fact, there have been deadlines set in places like the Southern District of Florida and Judge Cannon's courtroom where Trump has been required or was supposed to be required. That got changed by Judge Cannon. That's another story. But was supposed to be required to disclose whether or not he was relying on an advice of counsel defense. Same story in Judge Chutkan's courtroom in D.C. The advice of counsel defense is essentially a defense to crimes that says if you were relying on legitimate legal advice from your attorney and you acted accordingly on the basis of that advice, you might have an affirmative defense to the crime. But here's the deal. Here's the deal. If, in fact, you were engaged in a criminal conspiracy with your attorney, the advice of counsel defense cannot be applied because your attorney knew it was a crime and you knew it was a crime and you were conspiring together to commit the crime. So what this disbarment of John Eastman has effectively done is eviscerated any argument that Donald Trump might have had that he was relying on the advice of his attorneys when he worked to overthrow the 2020 election. This is a very big deal. And the finding of this judge in the disbarment can be applied by another court. Another court can take judicial notice of it, can use it as persuasive authority to rule that the advice of counsel defense cannot be invoked. So this is a very big deal. As I said, much bigger than you might expect on the basis of the fact that John Eastman was disbarred. Now, we had some questions about how the disbarment actually works. So I just want to make a couple of things clear. Many of us are licensed in multiple jurisdictions. I myself am licensed in 4. All right. And one of the things that I have to do every year when I recertify my bar admissions, like I'm inactive in 3 and I'm still active in New York State. One of the things that I have to do is certify that I haven't been disbarred anywhere else. And there is also, by the way, cross petitions that can be filed. If you are an attorney and you've been disbarred in one state, that state can notify the admitting authority of another state that you have been disbarred. All right. So once you're disbarred in one place, a la Rudy Giuliani, a la John Eastman, you will not be able to practice law anywhere else. And essentially what has been set here is that because he's been disbarred in California, he's not going to be able to practice law anywhere. His license has already been removed as of this morning. All right. And one of the things that I want people to be aware of here is that one of the things that got him convicted were statements from White House counsel during the Trump administration that they had told John Eastman that what he was doing was illegal. So the conspiracy goes very deep here. And I don't want anybody to be under the impression that John Eastman is still going to be able to practice law. He can't. He's done. Okay. Somebody did ask a question about how this issue of reciprocity. So one of the things that is the case when you are a licensed attorney in a given state is that some states allow you to do what's called waiving into another bar. You don't have to take the bar exam all over again in that state. You get to waive in on the basis of the fact that you've passed it somewhere else and you have authority. It's not true everywhere, but it's true in some states. Somebody asked a question this morning that I just want to clarify, though. The American Bar Association, aka the ABA, is not a licensing authority for attorneys. It's kind of like a voluntary membership organization, okay? You are actually licensed through individual states. So like you can't practice law if you haven't passed a state bar, except in the very limited number of states. I think there's only like one left where there's a practice way that you can become a lawyer as well. Like you practice for 3 years and you get in. All right. So John Eastman isn't going to be practicing anywhere else and he's done. And the California Supreme Court has to put a stamp on it, but he's finished. The Bar Association in California has removed his law license to practice. So very clear at this point that there are much larger implications to this for Trump. It really does undercut one of his primary affirmative defenses to some of these crimes related to January 6th. And I think it's another domino falling. It's another domino falling. All right. Okay. I want to give everybody a little bit of an update on what's going on in Judge Merchan's courtroom, because we did a breaking news broadcast on Tuesday about this. We spent a chunk of yesterday's broadcast talking about this. And now here we are back again with Trump's threats against Judge Merchan's daughter. So you will remember that yesterday morning on the broadcast, I went through this whole thing of how I had tracked down Judge Merchan's daughter. Everybody knew that she was working for this digital messaging strategy firm that had done some work for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. Nothing wrong with this, nothing shocking. But there were these allegations that were made in relation to Judge Merchan, that there was allegedly some conflict of interest and that his daughter had posted some anti-Trump stuff on her social media. Well, lo and behold, we learned yesterday afternoon that Judge Merchan's daughter had abandoned her Twitter account quite some time ago, and her Twitter account was hacked. And what is up now on her Twitter account, which is apparently like an image of Trump behind bars, is not something that she herself put up there. And Judge Merchan's courtroom made a statement about this yesterday to this effect. So what does this mean now? Well, first of all, it means that Donald Trump was relying on faulty information when he claimed all of this. All right. Next, though, is something a little bit larger, which is that if Trump again makes claims against Judge Merchan's daughter, alleging that she has posted anti-Trump material or something like this, right? And that somehow implicates a bias of the judge, which it doesn't. You can go back and watch yesterday's broadcast if you have questions about this, okay? But if he does that again, that's defamation. So things are getting very deep for Donald Trump in the way in which he is doing all of this. And we are going to have to see, okay, yeah, bye. Here we go. It's once again a day where I get to like live block trolls. So much fun. All right. So one of the things that I just want people to be aware of here is that this is not unusual. There are people who have locked their prior Twitter accounts who maybe didn't have two-factor authentication enabled. When I locked mine and left in December of 2022, it's still 2FA enabled, but people are getting hacked and there's no moderation or support or anything else going on Twitter. So she may not even have a way to get on there to actually alter it. So one of the things that I want people to just be smart about here, okay, is that as with everything else in this day and age, because I did get some comments about this, like, yesterday on the Patreon feed. By the way, you can ask questions for 2 hours before every broadcast if you become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $2 a month. That's like less than 10 cents a broadcast. So yesterday on the feed, people were like, but isn't this true? Didn't she say these horrible things about Donald Trump? And isn't that a conflict of interest? This is one reason why we have to be very, very cautious about the things that we read online, not just that are coming from Trump, but that are being seeded by right-wing media. And you may not even realize it at the time. And I'm going to remind you all, because y'all should be aware of this also, that we have this upcoming amazing program on media literacy, disinformation inoculation, and democracy protection that you can register for. It's called Truth or Fiction, and it starts on April 15th. And it's going to train you on how to be suspicious at the bare minimum of things like this in real time and how to back check it to know what's true and what isn't. All right. So you can get in on that. We're really excited about that. But this is another prime example, okay, of what happens when disinformation is out there circulating and it's unverified. It leads people like us, even on our side of the fence, to make conclusions that she's actually done something that she didn't, right? So one of the things that I want people to just be really smart about here is that we have to assume that everything that is coming out of far-right media, Donald Trump, seeded by people like Laura Loomer, horrible, horrible, horrible neo-fascist, terrible person, right? You have to assume that everything that they are saying is not accurate. And that was very clearly the case here, okay? So we have yet to see what Judge Merchan may do about this particular series of statements. We went into detail about the sort of nuances of the gag order on this yesterday. But for now, I want everybody to be very, very aware that Judge Merchan's daughter did not make any overtly anti-Trump statements saying he should be behind bars. And I'm going to say something else. As someone who works in digital messaging, as she does, it would have been profoundly stupid for her, even from a professional standpoint, to be doing that. So the whole thing should have been taken with a grain of salt to begin with. All right. Okay, I want to talk about a couple of other developments because we have an ongoing hearing right now in Fulton County, literally underway as we speak right now, which involves what are called demurrers. Okay, demurrers are another name in some states for what are called motions to dismiss. All right. Motions to dismiss are ordinarily preliminary motions. They can take place in civil or criminal cases, which are essentially designed to cause the judge to kick an indictment or a complaint out of court before any evidence is admitted. All right. Basically says this complaint or this indictment is so faulty on its face that the court should not even entertain it. So this morning, what's being heard are allegations that have been made by Trump and another co-defendant that freedom of speech was all he was engaged in when it came to trying to overthrow the election. Fortunately, the attorney from the district attorney's office is making a very strong argument to the effect that this is like nonsense, right? Freedom of speech does not allow you to use your voice to try to engage in RICO violations. Freedom of speech does not allow you to lie to the federal government in a criminal investigation or to the state government. Freedom of speech does not allow you to impersonate an officer, an elections officer. So all of this at this point is quite likely at this point to lead to the conclusion that First Amendment rights aren't implicated. And I'm just going to mention, for those of you who have been following the nuances of these criminal cases, you will remember that Judge Chutkin already ruled in the DC District Court case that Trump's First Amendment rights were not at issue in the criminal prosecution of Donald Trump by Jack Smith. All right. So it's very unlikely at this point that any of these motions are going to be granted. All right. Yes, these motions are not new, Roberta, since the Fani Willis issue. They predated them, but we had kind of like an 8-week delay there because of the Fani Willis goose chase. So now we are on this. And honestly, we are still waiting quite a bit with bated breath to find out what's going to happen in terms of the potential trial date. All right. In Fulton County. Okay. So that's underway right now. And, somebody asked me also to just discuss very briefly the Georgia DA oversight bill. Now, everyone who was here last fall, when this first came up, after the Fani Willis indictments dropped, and there was all this noise about how the Georgia legislature was putting into place this new law that was supposed to allow for the investigations of like rogue prosecutors. And these were, at the time that this law was written, that this law was designed initially to be like, these are prosecutors who are prosecuting things that we don't think they should be prosecuting. There's been a lot of noise about this issue. Is this going to be used to try to get Fani Willis out of office and blah, 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 blah. Jack Kemp has already said, as the governor of Georgia, that he has no intention of applying this or having it applied to Fani Willis. So never say never. Georgia Republicans have done a lot of nonsense, all right? But I don't want anybody at this moment to be terribly worried about this Georgia DA oversight bill. It wasn't designed to get to Fani Willis. Could it? Perhaps, but it requires a committee and there has to be an investigation. The committee wasn't even sat until January. And I just, I'm not going to worry about this until it becomes like a real thing. And at the moment, it doesn't look like it's a real thing at all, okay? All right. We have and are waiting this morning for a determination from the Florida Supreme Court about the Florida abortion rights ballot initiative. What we are expecting today is that there's going to be a ruling from the Florida Supreme Court about whether or not the ballot can be amended to include this abortion rights ballot initiative that got like 1 million signatures in Florida. This is one of those things that we've been watching over time here on the broadcast. Again, those of you who've been here will remember this because some of our audience members, have to wave to all our friends in Florida, were involved in gathering signatures for this ballot initiative, which comes hot on the heels of the Ohio ballot initiative that got abortion rights ensconced in the Ohio Constitution. So what we're going to see here in this regard is that the Florida Supreme Court is going to rule on whether or not the ballot initiative was vague enough. Now, it's been challenged by Republicans on a variety of fronts. They just desperately don't want this on the ballot for obvious reasons, right? One of the things that is going to be decided upon is whether or not it's so vague that it can't be included on the ballot. I'm going to tell you right now, this is nonsense, but if the Florida Supreme Court happens to rule that way, it can be appealed to the Supreme Court. We're going to have to see how this goes, all right? But my perception on this at this moment is that we're going to have a ballot initiative in Florida that allows this to be put on the ballot. And that's going to be a really interesting ride because I'm just going to tell you all, Florida, even under Ron DeSantis, there are some indications right now that Florida could be in play in the 2024 election cycle. So people better buckle up because I'm going to remind you, Florida used to be a swing state. And there are some indications right now that are, like bubbling to the surface that there is like kind of like a bit of a blue thing going on in Florida at the moment. And we're going to have to see how this all plays out. So eyes on that one. Is supposed to come down later on today. Okay. Match slap. All right. CPAC. You will all remember Matt Schlapp and his wife, Mercedes Schlapp, are like the founders of CPAC, right? Which is like the conservative's not even the word, the fascist conference that happens all over the place. They had one in Hungary with Viktor Orban. They have them like multiple times a year and Trump always speaks at it. And it's a place where like far right-wing white nationalist conservatives can come on stage and like spew their nonsense. Matt Schlapp, you may remember, had been alleged by a former employee to have sexually assaulted that man in the back of a car after a campaign-related event. And then thereafter, there were multiple other men who came forward saying that Matt Schlapp had groped them and that had been involved in sexual harassment of men on his staff. The irony of this is so deep and thick because they are such an anti-LGBTQ organization. But here's Matt Schlapp sexually assaulting and propositioning his male staff members. So yesterday, this allegation was settled for $480,000. Now, Matt Schlapp immediately went forward and said he had gotten an apology from this young man, that he had done nothing wrong, and then he had to retract that because the settlement agreement requires him not to disparage the individual involved. So I want to make one thing clear about this for anybody who's paying attention to this. This was not actually a settlement that involved Matt Schlapp's own money. So one of the things that can happen sometimes when people are engaged in a professional environment and they are accused of sexual harassment or sexual assault is that insurance companies that have been retained to defend claims against individuals in an organization can step in, all right? And when it's an insurance company settling it, there tends to be a much more objective kind of valuation of what's really going on here. So a $500,000 settlement, I just got to make this clear, is not chump change. Right? And I think people should be aware that one of the things that this amount of money indicates is that there was a lot of there, and probably not just there with regard to this individual human being. Okay. Now, the fact that the money has come out of an insurance company's pocket rather than Matt Schlapp's is kind of a disincentive, right? Like it doesn't say to Matt Schlapp, "Oh, you better not do it again," because the insurance company covered it. Are their insurance rates going to go up at CPAC? Sure. But, this is how these things sometimes work. And I wanted people to be aware that it's not like Matt Schlapp himself has been dinged, which we can all kind of have our moment about because really he should be. And it's clear to me, by the way, that there's going to be other issues coming out about this because there have been allegations of financial mismanagement, the burying of other claims inside CPAC. And I don't think anybody should kind of be under the impression that all is well inside CPAC if you were prior to this point. I'm having like a little bit of I don't know, blowback to the NRA and the way the NRA allegations dripped out. And then suddenly there was like a floodgate about how Wayne LaPierre had been engaged in all of these financial misdealings with money that had come in through the NRA. So I don't think the story is over, but I do want people to be aware of exactly what's going on with this. Okay. South Carolina electoral map. I had a question about this again this morning on the Patreon feed. Reminder, you can ask me questions before every broadcast by becoming a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistance live right there. For 2 hours every morning, there's a question feed that goes up. And if you have questions and you want me to answer them, you can ask them. Okay. Less than 10 cents a broadcast. And you get a bonus broadcast every Sunday, which is our coffee hour, which is really fun and very relaxed and nice. Okay. This morning, a appeals court reinstituted gerrymandered maps that are under contention in South Carolina. A lot of people on the feed in South Carolina. Some of our folks are here. I'm waving at you. I know who you are. I want to just say one thing about this, though. This story isn't over yet. The reason why the appeals court put this map back in place is because of timing issues at the moment. But there is an ongoing appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States about racist gerrymandering on these maps. And it is quite possible that the Supreme Court will rule between now and June on this and say, nope, that map has to be tossed out. You've got to make a new one. And then we'll see what happens. So right now, there was a little bit of an uproar about this morning because it's something that the Court of Appeals did not have to do, but is sort of like a Band-Aid on the issue of like, what map are we using for purposes of this election? Mark Elias is on this. In fact, there's been reporting on this over in Mark Elias's newsletter, Democracy Docket. So you can go check out and read all the details over there if you would care to, okay? But one of the things that people should be aware of is that the story isn't quite over. The Supreme Court could rule like this afternoon that, like this map is racist. Well, they can't rule this afternoon because it's not a decision day, but they could rule very soon that this map is racist for the same reasons, by the way, that they tossed out the Alabama map. You will all remember this last year because Alabama refused to make more than one majority black district. And then they tried to avoid that Supreme Court ruling. And then eventually an independent person was put into place to redistrict the entirety of Alabama so that there were 2 majority black districts. The Supreme Court, even with this conservative majority, has not ruled favorably on cases of racist gerrymandering that have been before it in the last 18 months. And so my expectation at this point is that we are going to see a Supreme Court ruling that will strike down these maps. The question is just when, all right? So it's not great news in South Carolina, but the primary is coming up. And that's really part of the issue is that the primary is in June. And the appeal to the Supreme Court was on an expedited basis. And, the Supreme Court's like, twiddling their thumbs, waiting and not ruling on what should be going on here with the South Carolina map. So we shall have to see what takes place on this. But I just did want everybody to be very aware that it's not something right now about which you should panic. Okay. All right. Truth Social. So everybody knows that Truth Social went public and is trading right now on the stock exchange under the handle DJT because, narcissism requires that. There are a lot of people on the Patreon feed yesterday and today who were like, the stock price has gone up and, why is it going up and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So you all know that one of the things that I did when I was a litigator was I was a specialist in federal securities fraud cases. And that meant that I often did cases that were called shareholder derivative actions that were based on what are called pump and dump schemes. Okay. So for those of you who don't know what a pump and dump is where all sorts of positive information is announced about a stock, and the stock price goes like this. And then the people who are the primary owners of the stock, when it reaches a place where they think it can't go any higher, sell. And then for every other small investor who's involved, the stock price plummets all the way down to the basement, like pennies. Okay. This is something that the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, keeps a very close eye on, because if there is alleged information that is out there that says this company is worth $8.5 billion and it has all this money attached to it, when the reality is, we talked about this earlier in the week also, that the company itself has only made like $3.3 million ever, that it is operating at a tens of thousands of dollar loss every month. And yet there's all this information being put out there saying, oh, it's so great. Oh my God, you should go buy it. Wow, this company is so overvalued. Help out Donald Trump and buy this stock. And then the big owners of it are like, sell it for a massive profit and everybody else loses. That is a classic pump and dump. All right. Now, this morning, it covers everything, Scott. It's all securities that are traded. This morning, the stock is dropping again. Okay. And it's been up and down a little bit, but then it had a peak yesterday afternoon, which I think caused a lot of people to panic, right? I just want everybody to understand something about this. Okay. It's not like these things go unremedied. First of all, there is regulation through the federal government, namely the Securities and Exchange Commission, which can investigate and prosecute people who have engaged in criminal securities fraud. All right. Then there's the kind of work that I used to do, which is shareholders' derivative actions. And that's where there are people who are investors in a stock or a company who lost a ton of money. And these can be done on a class action basis for everybody who was invested in a stock who was victimized by the pump and dump or by any other form of stock fraud, by the way, because there's a lot of different versions of it. And those actions can sometimes result in like break the company kind of trial judgments. So all of this is not going unobserved. And as I was watching this happen the other day, all my alarm bells were going off as somebody who used to do securities fraud litigation, because you can just see, I mean, if you're me, you can see the class action lawyers lining up with like froth at the mouth, ready to file this lawsuit when the stock price drops. So everybody should understand that this looks at the moment like a very classic securities fraud scam. Now, the SEC has to have evidence of that. There's going to have to be proof that there were fraudulent statements put out into the marketplace that jacked the price. But I'm going to tell you, it's wildly overvalued, and everybody has known it since the moment that this deal was signed. It's one reason why the SEC was involved already in investigating the SPAC that was acquiring Truth Social, because there were questions about how the SPAC itself was funded. So this, at this moment, raises a lot of eyebrows. And I know there are a lot of people who are like, oh, Trump's making so much money off of it. Oh, he's a billionaire. No, he's not. It's all on paper. He still has a lockup provision that prevents him from selling any stock for 6 months. Yes, the board could vote him around that. We discussed this last week also. But it does not mean that if the stock gets dumped and the price plummets into nothingness, that there aren't going to be any very serious consequences for Trump and everybody else who's invested in this company. All right. So people should be very, very clear on this. All right. Very clear on the fact that like lots of people are watching this, including the SEC, and it smells really, really bad to those of us who have been involved in this kind of litigation in the past. George Conway is another person who used to do this kind of work. And I will just tell you, none of this looks remotely legit to those of us who have done this sort of work. Okay. So we'll have to see what comes of that. But I, at the moment, am telling you all that you should not be worried about this from the standpoint of either Trump getting rich off of it or the idea that if this is truly like a classic pump and dump, it's going to go unremedied. So, yes, I know a SPAC is not an IPO. I understand the difference of this. Thank you for the clarification. But I want everybody to understand that the way in which the stock is being valued right now is raising a lot of eyebrows. Okay. So there we go. All right. Okay. We are coming to the end of what has been like an insanely breaking news week. Okay. And I just want to let you all know that like, we're not done yet. I mean, I know you all know this, but we have a lot of ongoing potential expected breaking news between now and the end of the week tomorrow. And you all know what my usual expression is about this, about Fridays in Trump land. I just want to remind everyone here that during these extremely intense news cycles, it's very easy to get easily overwhelmed. All right. And I want everybody who's kind of watching all of this to remember that it's totally okay to take a break from the news if you need to. This is one of those weeks where I have to remind people that if you're feeling overwhelmed or exhausted, there's nothing wrong with stepping away from a day. Like, it's not like you're not going to know if something really important happens. And I have to say that even for me, who, you all know, like, my brain moves very quickly, and 15 years as a federal court securities lawyer and human rights lawyer means that I like move very fast in terms of how I assimilate information. Even for me, this week has been a lot. All right. So I want to just thank you all for being here, of course, but I also want to remind you that if things feel very intense, and they are right now. Yes. And Joe Lieberman passed, which is like, I have thoughts about that. And I have this thing of not wanting to speak poorly about the dead, but I'll just tell you all, the reason why we don't have like uniformly universal healthcare is because of Joe Lieberman. And that's a legacy. And so is no labels. And, like, I'm not a fan. All right. And yes, Sam Bankman-Fried got sentenced to 25 years for, I mean, that's a whole other thing. Yes, there's a lot of intense breaking news right now, just period. And everything that happened in Baltimore, right? With the bridge. So please feel free to just like take a break if you feel like you need it. And I have to remind you all that one of the things that's really critically important in this election year is we all do this work of getting out the vote and mobilizing and deep canvassing our neighbors and text banking and phone banking and getting involved, even if you've never done it before, is that we can't get to the finish line doing all the work that we need to do if we're burnt out in April, right? So you really have to manage your emotional reactions to all of the ongoing news. And I want everybody here to remember that there is no harm in taking a couple of days off so that you can rest, stream your favorite show on Netflix, chill out on the couch, and then get back to work. All right. So please make sure that you're doing what you need to do to make sure that by the time we get to November, you still got the push. And there are plenty of people out there, longtime activists who are friends of mine, who will tell you this. The point is not to get to the end game and be so burnt out that we can't then like remake the country, right? The point is to like manage it all so that by the time we get to November and we win everything, we're ready to really do all that good work. Okay. So much love to all of you today. Thank you for being here. Please, if you have not yet liked this broadcast or hit the subscribe button here on YouTube, do that. It really helps with the circulation. If you're watching after the live, drop me a comment. Tell me what you think, right? And I will also just say, reminder, patreon.com/resistance live. You got questions, I will answer them. You just got to head on over there. Subscriptions start at $2 a month. They go all the way up to 100 with extra perks. And I will see you all here tomorrow morning, regular time, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, unless there's a need for a breaking news broadcast today, which is entirely possible. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a fantastic Thursday, and I will catch you all here soon. All right. Bye.